Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes' Illuminati, the man who rules the world, takes on the head of the global elite in this all-new action-packed John Haynes series adventure. Get your copy of John Haynes' Illuminati in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, Isis, Amari's Revenge. The goddess next door is confronted by a Nubian queen out for revenge at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in this inaugural Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis, Amari's Revenge in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Better get the cool slow, y'all, cause we're having us a barbecue. It's time for Star Wars fans to charge Star Wars to the game. Now, I have been a Star Wars fan ever since I was 4 years old, and I can remember my brother taking me and my sister to the first Star Wars movie in 1978 because the film was such a blockbuster, it was running at theaters for the next year. And in that year, I remember my brother giving me a digital Star Wars watch, and that started my love for Star Wars all the way back in the late 1970s, and that love continued on for watching Star Wars movies because my brother took me to see The Empire Strikes Back in 1980, and in 1983 I saw Return of the Jedi 3 times. I saw it with my brother at a movie theater in Manhattan, and I saw it with my CES 132 classmates, and I also saw it with my mother and my sister again at the RKO Cinema on Fordham Road. So I have been a fan of Star Wars since the original trilogy, and I really enjoyed those movies so much that I was happy when my brother got me them as a gift, as a Christmas gift in VHS when the special editions came out. And in 2009, when they announced the DVD version of Star Wars, I went out here and bought that box set, which contained the original trilogy films that were the way George Lucas originally created them to be, and the special editions in one box set. So I have been a big fan of the Star Wars movies. However, I am no longer interested in being a fan of Star Wars now that I hear that George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars, has turned his back on all of us fans by siding with Disney and Bob Iger. Now, a couple of years ago, George Lucas decided to sell Lucasfilm, the company that owns the rights to Star Wars, to Disney for $4 billion. And in that time, many thought that this business decision would be one that would be able to preserve the legacy of Star Wars. Unfortunately, over the last couple of years, with the sequel trilogy, we see that the legacy of Star Wars isn't really a concern for Bob Iger and Disney. No, they are more concerned with grabbing cash from fans and looking to use Star Wars as a platform to springboard their social justice agenda. And that was shown to many of us Star Wars fans with the sequel trilogy first film, The Force Awakens, and how The Force Awakens really wasn't about showing us an adventure that showed us good and evil and heroes triumphing over evil. No, it was all about pushing an agenda of a feminist Jedi, and that was something that started to sour many fans. Now, myself as a black fan, I was really soured over the treatment of Finn, who was presented to us as a red herring as the hero of The Force Awakens, but in actuality was just a character who was passively there to represent black people, but aggressively pushed stereotypes of a janitor and a bumbling, stumbling, incompetent character who Rey basically emasculated throughout the film. And many fans continued to express their disappointment with Star Wars and the direction it was going in, with this new sequel trilogy, and those complaints basically reached a crescendo with the sequel to The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, and many fans basically started to sour on Star Wars with The Last Jedi. And while that film basically turned out to be one of the worst in the whole sequel trilogy, it looked like Disney wanted to try to turn things around with the final film, The Rise of Skywalker, but The Rise of Skywalker basically just showed that the entire Star Wars franchise was on its way to a fall. And now we see with George Lucas now basically signing off on Bob Iger's direction for Star Wars and Kathleen Kennedy's direction for Star Wars, that there is no hope of a new hope coming to Star Wars. And with there being no hope of a new hope to change the direction of Star Wars, this is where I say that fans have to charge Star Wars to the game, because if the corporation wants to just see Star Wars as just another intellectual property that they're using to generate cash, then the only response that customers can have is to just not buy the product anymore. That's the only response you can have as related to Star Wars at this point. Now, I know this is going to hurt a lot of fans as related to Star Wars. I know a lot of people have a lot emotionally invested in Star Wars. I mean, it was a major part of my childhood and a major part of my early years as a kid. It was the first big franchise that I saw at the theater, and I will always cherish those memories of sharing with my brother as related to our relationship, because that was one of the things that brought us close together. And Star Wars and comics and sci-fi, that will always be something that I am always close to my brother about. But I understand that while I have sentiment and love for my brother, I have more love for myself, because the disrespect that George Lucas directed towards me is something that I cannot brush off any longer. Now, when it comes to guys like George Lucas, these baby boomers, they basically are throwing up a middle finger at all of us Gen X, Millennial, Gen Y, and Gen Z fans, and even some boomer fans out there who invested their time in Star Wars, because we showed so much care for the history and the lore of Star Wars, and this creator, instead of reciprocating that love and passion by standing up with us, has decided to turn his back on us, because he's got the boomer mindset of he's got his now screw you, and now that he's got his fuck you money, he's telling us to go fuck ourselves. So this is where the fan has to stop being a fan, because at this point you have to understand where your self-respect is, and here is the opportunity for you to stand up and take your respect. Now, this is something I learned as a fan way back in 1987. I learned all about taking my respect as related to these properties that are owned by these companies way back in 1987, when I first saw Transformers the movie. Now, Transformers the movie came out in 1986, and in 1986, a lot of kids got upset in that summer when they saw many of their favorite Transformers, like Optimus Prime, Ironhide, Starscream, Ratchet, and Prowl, get murdered on screen. And as many kids saw their best friends that they used to watch every weekday getting killed in this movie, that's when many kids basically got so disgusted that they wanted absolutely nothing to do with Transformers. Now, I was 13 years old, and my brother brought me the tape of the Transformers, the movie, and Transformers Season 3 was playing, and it was at that point, after seeing many of my favorite characters that I grew up with when I was 11. I used to watch Transformers on Channel 11 at, I believe it was 3:30. It came on right before G.I. Joe, and I remember watching those Season 3 episodes and not having the same feeling of passion that I had for the Season 2 episodes. And the reason was because I was basically being disrespected by Hasbro, who wanted us to stop being fans of the G1 Transformers we grew up with, like Optimus Prime, Ratchet, Ironhide, Prowl, Wheeljack, and many others, and they wanted us to stop being fans of those characters so that they could go out here and sell us new characters, because they could no longer be able to use the Diaclone molds that were from the Diaclone toy line that were the Transformers, and they wanted to sell us new toys that they had made in-house, such as Ultra Magnus, who was basically a recolored version of the Power Convoy or something like that. And then they wanted to also sell us other characters like Hot Rod, Blur, Wheelie, Cup, and RC. But those characters really didn't catch on, and they didn't catch on because many of us kids from the 80s, many of us who are out here in the 80s, I remember a lot of kids who were latchkey kids. These characters were like our friends, and watching our friends die basically made many of us upset and mourn those characters because we watched our friends die. But for me, it was the disrespect directed at me by Hasbro to take my favorite characters off the screen and replace them with new characters. That was the thing that I found to be extremely disrespectful by Hasbro, and the way I took my respect was to just stop being interested in Transformers. Now I was 13 years old, and I was starting to move on from Transformers to looking to move on to do other things, like possibly pursue girls, or possibly pursue things like trying to find cool clothes for myself and enter into full adolescence. And this disrespect by Hasbro basically gave me the motivation to walk away from Transformers and basically move on. Now you'll see a Masterpiece Bumblebee knockoff in the background of my dresser, and I bought that because of my love for the old G1 Transformers, but I wasn't into Transformers the show and the toys like that because of the disrespect directed me by Hasbro. Now I've dealt with this disrespect from companies up to 2 more times in my life. I remember in 1995 when Marvel went out here and flagrantly disrespected comic fans when they decided they wanted to create a storyline called The Crossing. And in that storyline, they wanted to say that Iron Man, who had been a hero for over 30 years and 300 issues, they decided to hire a new writer, Terry Kavanagh, and editorial decided they wanted to do a storyline called The Crossing. And in that storyline called The Crossing, what they wanted to say was Tony Stark was a pawn of Kang and had always been a villain. Now this was a middle finger up at us Marvel Hero and Avengers and Iron Man fans, and it basically was such a disrespect that I wound up walking away from Marvel, partially because I was still looking for a job, but I was just felt disrespected, and it made me really changed the way that I looked at Marvel. I used to be a big-time fan of Marvel until this flagrant disrespect was directed at me. So I understood that it was time to walk away, and I walked away from Marvel. I tried to come back in 2000, but they further disrespected the Iron Man character by creating that mask in the Iron Man storyline, and that basically closed the door for me in Marvel at 2001. I was walking out the door in 95, and I walked completely out in 2001, and that's because of the disrespect directed at me by a company that didn't want to respect its own lore, the same way that George Lucas doesn't respect his own Star Wars lore, because for him it's all about the money and not about respecting all the customers that made him rich in the first place. Now, this isn't the only time I've walked away from a property. I remember with DC Comics and the disrespect they directed at comic fans in 2011 when Dan Didio had the audacity to say that he was going to end the DC universe and decided that he and Warner Brothers, they wanted to create this new 52 as an entry point for so-called new readers, and basically disrespected every DC Comics fan from 1939 to 2011. And with that disrespect, that's when I just decided to charge DC Comics to the game, because if you're not going to respect your own lore and your own history, then I have no reason to go out and continue supporting any of your products. And at that time, around 2011, I was out here buying a lot of DC Universe Classics figures. I mean, I was buying whole waves in pre-orders and even picking up DC Direct figures here and there. And all of that stopped once DC decided to throw a middle finger up at me as a fan and show me no respect for supporting these stories and the lore of the DC Universe. Then I don't need to invest any more of my time. Now, when it comes to being a fan, this is an interdependent relationship, and the creator has to show as much passion for the product as the customer has for wanting to spend it. And if the creator, like George Lucas, has no passion for the product, then they are not deserving of a fan's money. That's something I believe as a creator myself. If I don't come to the table with my very best product as related to story and have a passion enough to stay consistent to the history and continuity I established for something like the SJS Direct Universe, then I have no right to ask anyone to put their money on the table for a paperback or a Kindle book of an Isis esteemed John Haynes Spinsterella trilogy or a vampire novel like Eternal Night in the SJS Direct Universe. Because I believe as a creator, you have to show respect for your fans by going out and putting your very best product on the table for them to be able to purchase and put all of your effort and your heart into that work, because that's the way you show respect for all those people who are out here as a part of your audience. Because you cannot expect the audience to care if you don't. You can't expect the audience to get excited for your product if you don't. And the apathetic response from George Lucas basically shows me that he's more concerned with all of the money he has already made and more concerned with living his last years, enjoying all the money he made off Star Wars, and is now content with letting Disney do whatever it wants. And since the original creator is not showing any sort of love for his creation, then it's time for all of us fans to basically charge Star Wars to the game. And I have no problem charging Star Wars to the game because I charged many other properties that I mentioned in this video to the game, like Transformers, with the disrespect shown to me with Transformers the movie, and with Marvel and DC. I mean, if these publishers and these companies don't want to go out and show me any sort of passion in staying true to the source materials that they create, staying true to the lore of their stories, then I don't need to invest time in those stories anymore, because if they won't respect their stories, why should I care about them? Now that goes back to a critical question a screenwriter like myself and a creator like myself has to ask before I take time to put fingers to the keyboard. Before I take time to put fingers to the keyboard, I have to ask myself, why should the audience care? And why should I care to take the time to put fingers to the keyboard to write a story for one of my SJS Direct Universe books? And if I answer that question, then I can go and have the passion to put the fingers to the keyboard for that story. And when I put the fingers to the keyboard for that story, I do that because I love the stories that I'm writing, and I'm hoping that my fans, the few of them that read SJS Direct Universe books, will get just as excited. And I want to go out here and have that relationship with those readers, but it seems like George Lucas, who is now comfortable with his money, has become extremely apathetic to his fans, and it's become to the point where now that he's got his FU money, now what he's going to do is let Disney go out here and take the audience for granted And as they take the audience for granted, they show how little they care about Star Wars because as these movies start to fail at the box office with Solo, a Star Wars story, and many of the shows that were made for Star Wars start to fail to gain an audience and the merchandise piles up, we see that Star Wars has turned into just another property, a property that people are walking away from, and now that George Lucas has signed off on him not supporting Bob Iger and supporting Disney Star Wars and the direction that fans don't want it to go in, well, it's time for fans to do what I'm going to do and have done with many other properties and just charge Star Wars to the game. And as you charge it to the game, you're in that place where you can just say, I have no problem not going back to this franchise because this franchise, as related to life, yeah, we had some great memories with Star Wars, but now it's just time to move on to something else. And there are just so many great stories out there that we can go out here and explore and discover now that our relationship with Star Wars is over, because it's better to leave a relationship rather than let a company attach an emotional hose to you and try to force you into a codependent relationship where they hope to just keep jerking you around, making it look like they are going to change, but they just want to ram their agenda down your throat. And my life is too precious to sit there and be a part of a codependent relationship because, as I stated before, when it comes to being a fan is an interdependent relationship. It's one where a creator like myself goes out here and puts their best effort forward. It's where I go out here and put my best work on the table, whether it be like my hand-drawn books when I first started out, and I work to improve to get better. I always strive to bring my best to the table, and if you can't bring your best to the table, that's when it's just time for you to walk, for the creator to just walk away. And since George Lucas is walking away from Star Wars and over to Bob Iger and basically betraying everything he's believed in, as I see it, because this boomer has basically turned to the dark side as I see it. I mean, he's gone from being the guy who showed us the battle between the Empire and the Rebellion and showing us the importance of the Rebellion, and now that he's a part of the Disney Empire, he has become a corporate Darth Vader who has turned to the dark side. And since he's turned to the dark side, the only thing the fans can do is rebel against Star Wars by charging Star Wars to the game and keep it moving to some other independent franchise and go and support those independent franchises like the one I'm creating at the SJS Direct universe. Now, if you want to pick up some of those SJS Direct universe titles that you see in the ads in these videos, like those for the ISIS series, those for the Steam series, those for the John Haynes series, those for books like those in the Spinsterella trilogy, or my vampire novel Eternal Night, you can find all of those books in paperback and Kindle format on Amazon.com, and you can find them on digital book platforms like Smashwords, Draft2Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble's Nook, and you can also find paperback copies at online booksellers like Barnes & Noble and big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you want to see me make more videos about science fiction, fantasy, and fandom, you can send a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Coming to paperback and e-readers, Isis Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new Isis series adventure. Pre-order your copy of Isis Dark Incubus at Amazon.com and other online booksellers everywhere. Coming to paperback and e-readers, A Steam Horror in the Hamptons. The aspiring angel tries to escape a house of horrors in this all-new Esteem series adventure. Pre-order your copy of Esteem Horror in the Hamptons in digital format at Amazon.com, Google Play, Draft2Digital, and other digital booksellers, or pick up your paperback copy on May 24th. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.